Good morning and welcome as we continue our devotional series looking at some of the stories that Jesus has told. The story for today is the story of the unforgiving servant. It's a story that asks this question at the heart of the story is, what exactly do we have to do with forgiveness? How many times do we have to forgive a person before we can just toss them out of our lives and be done with them? There's this meme that comes around every once in a while with this one. And when it does, I usually share it to my pages. And it's a picture of Jesus with his disciples, and Jesus saying this very famous line from the beginning of this passage where he says, I tell you, you should forgive your brother not 7 times, but 70 times 7. And one of the disciples with his hand on his forehead saying, great, now not only do I have to forgive my brother, I have to do math as well. This parable was told because Peter came up and asked Jesus, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive my brother if he sins against me? Is 7 times enough? There's a bit of humor that gets missed in this passage sometimes when you stop to think that we hear this word brother and sometimes we translate it in our minds very generally as other people. How many times do we have to forgive other people? But the flip side of this is that Andrew, Peter's real-life brother, was also a disciple of Jesus and was probably standing right there when Peter asked Jesus, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive this brother of mine? Is 7 times enough? Jesus says then not 7 times, but 77 times. And then he tells this story to kind of hammer home the point, and it's really a point about perspective. When I think about forgiveness and how difficult it can be to forgive, especially big hurts that have been done to me, what Jesus is really saying, he doesn't minimize the hurts that have been done to us by others, but he does ask us to put those hurts into perspective. And so he tells this story, and he begins this story in chapter 18, verse 23. And he says, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. And so he began to call his servants before him, and he called this one servant who owed him, he says, 10,000 talents. Now this is where you got to bring a little math in to make this meaningful for us. 10,000 talents. A talent was roughly equivalent to about 20 years' wages for a day laborer. So you take 10,000 and multiply that by those 20 years. And so we're talking about 200,000 years worth of wages for a day laborer. That's what this servant owed this king. Now, of course, he couldn't pay it. And so he began to beg. He fell on his knees before this king and begged for just a little more time to pull it together. The king, knowing he could never do that, he canceled his debt, forgave it, free and clear. Now you can imagine what you would do if you owed an insurmountable debt like that and it was paid off free and clear. But this servant, he went out, he found another servant who owed him some money. In comparison, this servant owed this man 100 denarii, and one denarii was worth about 1 day's wages. So this man owed him, approximately 3.5 months worth of wages. It was a lot, but it was nothing in comparison with the 200,000 years of day laborers' wages that this servant had owed the king. And Jesus creates this striking contrast between these two servants. Both of them fell on their knees when they realized they couldn't pay. Both begged for a little more time to pull the money together. The king forgave the first servant, free and clear. But that first servant refused to have mercy on the other and had him thrown in prison. Word got back to the king, and this was the king's reply. So the master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me, and should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. Then, in commentary on this story, Jesus ends in verse 35 by saying, so also will my heavenly Father do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. So when it comes to this question, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? Jesus was throwing a number out there in the hopes that you would forget, you wouldn't keep track. Hey, I've hit 77 times or 70 times 7, I can be done with this person. But you would forgive and you would forgive and you would forgive and you would forgive without count. Because that's how God has forgiven you. Jesus wasn't minimizing the hurts and the sins that other people commit against you. But he was asking you to have a little perspective. He was asking you to pause, to stop and think, to realize the great unpayable debt that God canceled through his Son, Jesus Christ, on your behalf. Jesus paid for that debt in his own blood. And if God forgave you that enormously high amount, then perhaps you can forgive others when they sin against you. Have a great day.